Hello, my name is Tim Jenkin. I'm your host for today's edition of Taking Back Our Economy, a webcast series presented by the Community Exchange Alliance. We are a learning community where people can share experiences, knowledge, insights, and information about the limitations of the present monetary system and the use of alternative means of exchange, such as sharing, swapping, gifting, bartering, time trading, and community currencies. We believe that by bringing people together to share what they have done, what they have learned, the tools they have developed, and how it has changed their community, it motivates us all to take action to reduce the disparities caused by the ever-growing fixation on the pursuit of money. Today, my fellow founders of the Community Exchange Alliance, Anitha Beberg, Edgar Cahn, Christine Gray, and Martin Simon, are joined by a special guest, Will Ruddick, who has been promoting community currencies for many years in Kenya. Welcome, Will.
Thanks for having me.
Can you please briefly introduce yourself and share with our audience some of the wonderful things you've been doing in Kenya?
Sure. Thanks for having me again. Will Ruddick, the founder of Grassroots Economics Foundation. It's a small little nonprofit in Kenya. We've been trying different things for about 10 years, looking at a lot of things that you all have done and trying to duplicate them in different ways. And I think over the years, we've kind of settled into a sort of voucher modality where we work mostly with women's groups, like 28 women who they all have different goods and services that they offer. Quite often they're different kinds of, farmers or shopkeepers and that sort of thing. And they'll create a credit for their production for that year. And so it's a promissory note against their future production, very simple. And they decide how they are going to distribute it. Often it goes into projects as well as into based on what people are also committing to the network. Very simple. And then we've also gotten into this stuff where we are trying to enable these communities to choose to connect to other communities. So they have their token, and we do this on an open kind of free to use blockchain done by some universities called Bloxburg. And it's Bloxburg with an X, Bloxberg. And anyways, the currency in this case is just a contract that can be defined in that space, that public ledger. And then in that contract, there's the potential to choose to connect to other tokens with a weight. And so we're just starting to sort of experiment with that. We did quite a bit of experimentation in 2019. And then 2020, we've been kind of this year rewriting almost all of our code, but then COVID hit. And so we're sort of trying to get back into that state right now. And so hopefully January, we'll sort of reopen it so that communities can start doing their own voucher issuance quite soon here. But until then, so most of this year, we've been essentially distributing kind of a network token. So it's just one token that is been distributed into different communities to just give them like a basic income token, actually, is what it's probably most similar to. And so as January comes, that basic income token will start to dissolve into allowing these communities now to develop their own voucher systems and connect them to each other. So the fundamental piece of the I guess maybe what's sort of new about the thinking around community currencies is just can intrinsically in the contract for that currency, can there be some sort of optional connection to other tokens? And there's just a very simple protocol there, which can be a weight less than one or a weight equal to one, where a weight equal to one would basically mean for every one of Tim's tokens, I've got one of my tokens in existence. Yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell. I maybe number wise, we've got about 42,000 users as of this year, mostly very small businesses. The largest businesses in those networks are usually schools or wholesale shops. And we've done about $2.5 million if measured in Kenyan shillings, of trade this year between them. And that can also be kind of categorized into education, and most of it, like the top tier, is mostly food and water, and then education. So that's been nice to show Red Cross and other government agencies that, you know, here's what maybe your economies could look like if money wasn't so scarce, right? And so that's been a nice metric for the aid industry also to look at and say, well, maybe, you know, we could do our job better if we did a little bit differently. And especially a lot of aid nowadays is cash transfer programs. So they're just dumping money on a community and walking away. So instead of doing that, can they actually create or help promote the development, train people to develop their own community currency? So that's been really exciting. We've Red Cross has just started to hire their first person to work on this as well, which is an exciting thing. Like just to even see Red Cross putting a job description out to hire people to build community currency. I think that's, if there's one thing I can say I've done that I'm excited about, is that I got that to happen. So I feel good about myself this week anyways. Yeah. Over, guys.
Our topic today is how money has shaped our world, and what our world would look like if monetary means of exchange were to become predominant. Of course, the focus will mainly be on the second part of the topic, namely, what would the world look like if non-monetary exchange was predominant? But in order to do that, we need to understand how money has shaped our present world. And even before we do that, we need to define what it is that we mean by money. So what do we actually mean by money? I mean, everybody has their take on it, but most of us understand it. And the textbooks define money essentially by its functions. In other words, it's a medium of exchange, it's a unit of account of value, and it's a store of value. And but as you know, money is much more than just these sterile functions. And from that, you can't really infer very much about how money would shape our world simply by considering its functions alone. What we can say, though, that is money is related to exchange, that it is a means employed to facilitate exchange. And exchange really is a property of life. But human exchange differs from natural exchange in that humans develop methods and create different means to facilitate exchange. And money is just one of these means, but not the only one, as we hope to show. Okay, so looking at what has been considered as money historically, we can see that attached to its history, it is a history of who provides it and who controls it. And even from the earliest times, from even before money was invented, we can see that whoever controlled exchange also controlled society. In short, we can say that the control of money, or the controls of the means of exchange, has been the primary means by which one sector of society has controlled the other. So we can say that the aforementioned functions of money are but a few of its minor functions. Its primary function has always been as a control system, providing one sector of society with the means to control the rest of society. And another of the primary functions of money is that it's always ensured that one sector of society benefits more from the productive energies of the populace than others. In other words, it's created a class society or a hierarchical society with owners and controllers at the top and an underclass of providers at the bottom. And the wealth moves from the bottom towards the top. Money, thus, is very much more than some minor neutral utility provided to enable us to facilitate exchange in complex societies. Anyone else would like to comment on what I've said and what the meaning of money is?
I began to develop a different currency. It was because money devalued so many things. We value what's scarce. As a thing becomes more abundant, its value decreases. And I suddenly realized that that meant being a human being was worthless because we're not scarce. The capacities that enabled our species to evolve and survive are the capacities of listening and caring and coming to each other's rescue and standing up for what's right and teaching each other what we know. And those are capacities that every human being has. And so we had devalued all of the activities that were critical to the survival of groups and to survival of the species in a world that maybe or maybe was not ready for us. And so I think that I needed a currency that valued what we universally had. And the thing I picked on was time. We all have time, and if we made that the unit of account and a measure of value, I thought we would have a different way of tapping the capacities of people that the market did not value. The market does not value the time of children and the time of elders and the time of people who are disabled. And it also discriminates in how it assigns the work of people of minorities, of women, of children. So I thought we needed a different currency that had a different balance. Then I found out that currencies really involve a mix of two different kinds of values. One is what you can trade it for, and the other is how it makes its intrinsic worth, how it makes you feel about yourself. And so I thought if we had a currency that valued what it meant to be the best human being you could, which is worthless in the market economy, then maybe we would have a currency that valued what it meant for our species to be here and to help each other survive and contribute.
Anitha, would you like to comment? We're really just talking about the meaning of money as opposed to.
There's things that, I mean, I know Tim and I have different views on money. For me, I don't believe like money is the root of all evil. I think money is just energy. That's it. But it's the people that control it that may make money to be evil. So some of the things I feel like if we had money in this country, in the US, that wasn't run by a private family kind of thing in the name of, oh, Federal Reserve, you know, having them print money. If it was owned by the people, you know, and it was backed by the people, I know Will would agree with me, money backed by the people would be something that would be far better. So, I mean, that's about it.
Well, backed by the people also means that you will accept its value. If somebody comes up to you and says, here's a piece of paper, it's money, you either accept it or you don't accept it. And the whole question of how we build levels of contribution that are honored by others as contributing value becomes a real process of creating a different kind of network. All of us will accept $1, but we won't necessarily accept a time credit unless we know what the time credit stands for. And if time credits only stand for acts of contribution and caring, then we know that we're affirming the value of what somebody did to earn it and create it.
So the time credit for me is the promise. It's the promise that you make to do something back for your community at some time in the future. I think that's the strength and the power of it. And as I was interested in this topic, I was talking to a psychotherapist years and years ago, early days of time banking in the UK, and he was saying that we've let money into our psyches so deep, it's as deep as our mother's milk now. It's part of who we are, and I think it's something that I think I'm a bit with Anitha in that this money provides an awful lot and does an awful lot of good things, but we need complementary systems and the more natural human systems to complement it. I have a friend, Mark Boyle. I don't know if people know Mark. He was he lived without money for 3 years, and he started off. He didn't have any money. He wasn't going to use it for 3 years, and he started off thinking very frugally about and collecting things and thinking how we do. Within a few weeks, he realized that in order to survive without money, he had to wake up as he woke up every morning and think, how generous can I be today? Because without it, he wasn't going to survive. So I always remember that, and the thought of what sort of world would we create without money? Trust and that need to be generous and open to others in order to exchange with them it was. I mean, he was a very healthy young man, so I mean, he couldn't have survived if something had gone wrong, with his health or. And everyone was quite happy to give him a lift places and all the rest of it. But that general idea that it isn't that you get more money by hoarding it and being mean, and it's actually just more generous you are without money, the more successful your relationships are likely to be. Yeah.
So I would like to just reflect a little bit, Tim, on what you spoke about with the power and how money is used by one class of people, one group of people, to dominate other groups of people. And it isn't just money that does that, of course, but prior to money, I think there were societies where you had power exercised purely by force. So we've always had a hierarchy. It's just that I think as we've moved forward in time, we've come to value more and more and more this idea that everybody has a right to a good existence on the earth, and why should some people have lots and lots of wealth and power and others not? And money has, in fact, it was at one time thought it would raise all ships. When people came to America or went to Australia, or whether to this empty land, they thought, and everybody could share using money and exchange. But in fact, the way that money works, which is what Edgar was speaking to, it accumulates power. It does accumulate power. And we do need, as Martin said, we need complementary things that allow us to be those equal human beings that we also believe us to be. So yeah, it is there. It is associated with power, sometimes in good ways and sometimes in really bad ways. And we need alternatives, is my view. And I'll just finish by saying I was fascinated by what you were sharing, Will, and I found myself wondering, how do those work? But that's for a second part of this topic, but it was really interesting listening to what you're doing.
Thanks.
Okay, I just want to comment again about money. I'm not saying that we can't see money as energy and that money doesn't do good and all that sort of thing. I'm just looking at the history of money. I'm trying to say that it's always, right from the beginning of time, it's always been associated with power. Force can be used to exploit others, but not over the long term. You need a means to control other people, and through controlling the means of exchange is how you do it, whether that's through forcing everybody to deliver all their goods to a central palace or something. That's still controlling the means of exchange or money. And the history of it shows that it's always been those who issue the currency control the currency and control the supply of it and control the society thereby. So, well, we're all about breaking out of that paradigm, and clearly there are ways to do money as such without this sort of power thing hanging on to it. So anyway, let's just move on to the kind of second part of the question and looking at how money has shaped our world. I mean, we've mentioned already the social control aspect of it, and those who control money also control the direction of development, or which way the society moves. And when the object of production is profit, we end up with the entire economy producing a single product, money. So everyone is really, even though you can look at all the products in the world, they're almost a byproduct of people trying to make money. And we can almost define the economy as such, as a place where people make money. I mean, why do people set up businesses? Really, it's to make money. They're not really so concerned about what they produce. And the pursuit of money, of course, encourages competition and creates division and enmity. In the worst case, it leads to wars. And money has always been expansionary. You know, we started with small societies, small productive units. They got bigger and bigger. The big ones absorbed the smaller ones. And today's productive units, these massive multinational corporations, have become so large and powerful that they even control governments and want to control the entire world. And with expansion comes centralization. And today we see forces wishing to create a centralized one world currency. And with that, a centralized one world government. And it's very clear today in COVID land, we see how moneyed interests are shaping our futures. So, I mean, we can find millions and millions of ways that money has shaped our world, but those are the big things.
How is it different in Africa?
You know, the story just crossed my mind is just, you know, it was the other day and it was a guy selling chapati, and it's like a pancake, and he was getting sort of a pitch from an intern that was from university here, trying to explain, you know, why he should offer his chapati, at least some of it, to the community, you know, in this way by accepting this community token. And he's like, well, I wouldn't do that. You know, why would I do that? Well, you know, and then we said, well, you know, maybe you could buy vegetables. And he says, well, show me that lady who was going to sell me the vegetables first, and then I'll sell my chapati. So we said, well, where do you buy your vegetables? And we go over there. He points to the lady, and we go and walk to the lady and just tell her the exact same thing, and just say, well, he said he would actually sell you these chapatis if you sold him vegetables, right? And so they became a really nice pair, and that was like last week, and we call that braiding. You know, you take one rope and you add it to the next rope, and you add it to the next rope, and just keep doing that around the place. And I just think that like the ability for people to share is generally not what our monetary system is about, right? It's about concentration, right? It's about, you know, like that's was as kind of designed, right? You know, the whole idea was, how do we concentrate wealth? And so, you know, money goes out, but then it sort of trickles back up to where it kind of came from. Essentially, it's like boomerang money, right? And I think that there's a lot of like design features that, you know, the community currency kind of movements and time making movement have been trying to push to say, well, what are those kind of contractual designs and different parameters we could say that sort of like instill better values into money itself. And I think that's what kind of got me into all of this originally. And I think what's exciting right now about this concentration of wealth as well is that, well, you could create money that has things like demurrage or holding fees or negative interest rates and things like that, so that, you know, like, or like reputation, it expires over time, you know, things like that aren't made for hoarding anymore. But also, you could also still have sort of different types of money on decentralized ledger systems. So like the control of the ledger itself, because you know, even in Kenya right now, for you to trade anything, they just enacted this law in 2014. It's called payment service providers, right? If you are trading anything to buy anything else, they've made that technically illegal unless you're basically a bank, right? So like they literally did make barter illegal, you know, back in, I mean, we've just kind of, you know, because we don't have any currency flowing in our systems, you know, there's no fiat in or out of the systems, it's been deemed okay, and we're a nonprofit with Red Cross, but technically, you know, if we get large enough, we'll either have to get a banking license or have a partner with that. So, you know, like that control over the ledger, right? Like who gets to transact at all, right? It's essentially like the hut tax when the British first came here. They charged everyone, you know, 20 shillings to have a house, right? To live essentially, right? And where would people get that money from them? It's the same kind of thing. Like you cannot literally trade without the government saying you could trade a spoon for a fork, you know, that sort of thing. And so that level of control, like what's nice about the blockchain movement to some degree is to say, well, if there is a public ledgers and this is still, not set in stone, but, we're just using this free university group. It's, there's like 50 different universities that run these nodes. So it's sufficiently decentralized. We trust those universities to not be, screwing with the ledger. But if anyone can access and write contracts onto that ledger, then it's a next level of sort of decentralization. So not only, is it about allowing communities to issue their currencies, but can you allow them to do such, or can they access a decentralized kind of infrastructure in order to do that? So no one can control the ledger either.
With blockchain, I looked into it a lot myself, and it seemed to me that most of it is not like you're talking. It's moving towards another monopoly, and I think China's involved in at the moment, so rest of it. But it registers individual transactions. Can you use it to register collective action?
Billion versions of blockchains, and most of them, I would say, we've actually switched. We're on our third switch right now to a different blockchain. So we've literally picked up and said, screw this, we're going to try a different one, because they end up being extractive mechanisms. They like they're built, many of them anyways, are built to have toll roads in them that will just, they're free at first, and then they start hiking up your transaction fees more and more and more and more. It's a scam, essentially, right? They, it's open doors in, but then, you're going to be screwed eventually. So finding sort of a real humanitarian blockchain. I mean, the basic idea is that you've got these contracts, and those contracts are essentially like a computer function or something like this, right? So if Tim says, okay, I have a function that's going to take two different kinds of inputs, right? So if one of my inputs says transfer ownership of an amount to Martin, that's a function on that contract, right? During the execution of that, there could be a fee that goes to someone. There, it's programmable, right? So you could put all sorts of stuff in there. If there is on the contracts we're using, there's none of that. There's no fees, but you can transfer it, right? So there's and also you have an option to connect or convert into another token as well, and that can be sort of defined by the issuer of that contract, right? So that's all you're doing. You're just specifying, as clearly as I think we can as humans right now, like what is the contract behind this, and then it's immutable from that point of view. So like that contract cannot be changed again. It's been copied by, let's say your blockchain has 60 nodes in it. Those would be computers at different universities. And so what they've done is they've taken that contract out, they've duplicated it on all their servers so that no one can go in and make a change to it, because they would all say, no, that's not the original anymore. And the same goes with transactions. So for every transaction, it gets pushed out there. So that's it. And a block, you could have that on 10 computers around, South Africa. And, for most intensive purposes, that would probably be good up to 1 million users. A lot of the blockchain stuff we see today is based on like Bitcoin, which is this proof of work stuff, right? So if you put a node into the network, you actually make blockchain, you make Bitcoins. That's like the validation fees. And those fees are exactly sort of the scam that gets people to, tap into those networks and say, okay, look, I want to get that money, so I'm going to run a node on the network. And they end up in these, huge energy and efficient things. And so like the basic technology is just to say, how do we create simple decentralized ledger systems? And then how do we just write contracts on those? Forget everything else about it. And the actual cost to run a blockchain might surprise you. It's like, running one of these nodes is the equivalent of just 24/7 running a 486 computer, right? Maybe you'd go up to $20 a week or a month. Sorry. And this is like, with in our case, these are in little IT departments in a university that has thousands of them anyway. So it really doesn't cost them anything to run the blockchain, relatively. And so like what would you get, the fees that people are being charged, like on Ethereum, it goes up to like $10 to do a transaction. What's that based on? Nothing. It's just a speculative market, based on greed and all this kind of stuff. So if you just take the technology and say, okay, maybe a decentralized ledger is useful. It doesn't, a lot of these contracts, you can also just, even if there's only one node in the network and that is, Tim's server there, well, fine. It's still the same technology. It's just to say, okay, well, we could duplicate that, a few times to make it more redundant, just in case if Tim gets taken out or something. I mean, the whole idea of trade balance is quite sort of obvious with the voucher issuance. Like you've minted these vouchers. There's a claim against some production, or what you want to give to the community, and then it's you to be spending those out. And by you, at this point, we don't have individuals doing this. The you is 28 women, for instance, right? As a group, that's the you. And so there's a lot of inner trade even among them, even before it goes out, to people who weren't part of the issuance. And I do think that that's, like, if all money is just issued, that's essentially kind of a form of credit, right? Like they're creating a credit against their production or promissory note. I think that the UBI type issuance of currency is a really interesting way to produce connections between currencies. I think that's slightly interesting, because if like, Tim makes this, he makes a bunch of tokens either in a mutual credit scheme where there's this credit space that's been created, and Edgar has created this credit space over here with this currency, and Martin's made another one. How do we relatively value those amongst each other? And that can be an individual choice, like Edgar and Tim can get together and say, well, let's create a network like this, or let's value our currencies with weights, compared to our supplies and whatnot. If it's on a blockchain, well, I can see how many tokens they all have, right? But with a UBI token as the bond or the membrane between them, there's the chance that you can create sort of a nice sort of fair distribution with a basic income type token. And there's some interesting ways that I've seen this there's a group in France called Dunitier, where they have their issuance scheme of their basic income scales by the number of people. So over time, it actually increases, with the idea that if you've been in it longer, it doesn't help you that much. Even like it's sort of fair in time as well. I still like the idea of there being a demarrage to it. I don't like things that increase exponentially forever. But anyways, I can see that the usage of something like that, like the basic income token as sort of a networking token that everyone has access to, and that you could build, like that's sort of your substrate in a way, and you could build your credit systems or your mutual credit systems sort of out of that, and choose to connect into the greater network. So if we want networks of currencies that can connect to each other, I think that's an interesting way to do it. And I also just want to mention that there, like the contracts we're dealing with also allow people to connect to not only each other, but you could also choose to put in stable coins against the US dollar and all that kind of stuff as well. And that opens up a whole nother can of worms that I don't think we'll end up getting into here in Kenya, but other people are using those contracts in different ways to connect with using dollars, for instance, as the connection between, or weighting their currency against a dollar. And that has all, like, I've noticed in Kenya, as soon as you tell people at all, if people think that they're going to cash this money out at some point, like turn it into shillings, then it certainly won't cause circulation, right? People will literally save it until their death day, like if this is going to get them some rand or Kenyan shillings, then for sure, like we're not going to circulate this money. Maybe if there's some major demarrage on it or something, but yeah.
I was thinking of using universal basic income coins or tokens as similar to, like, timeshare credits. If you go to a timeshare vacation thing, they'll give you a number of points that you can use for your vacation, but there's a limit on how long that will last, and then it goes. So just to kind of force people to continue to use it for those things that are stipulated as basic necessities, to keep using it and bring money back into the local economy, rather than hoarding it for something else. Yeah.
I'd still say that at some point someone needs to sort of back it up in a way. They have to make that sort of commitment. And that might just be a voluntary thing, but the more contractual I think that is in our case, the better. That people feel comfortable, like this hotel is accepting them. It says on the website, that sort of thing.
But the moment you get someone to back it up, doesn't that make the same issue of money then? Whoever controls it sort of has all the power, or you mean a different way?
Yeah. Well, the thing with money is that, like, we don't ever believe it expires. It's a little bit like what was this desert island, who wrote about this, where, like the guy makes like 3 years of supplies and he buries them in the earth. And then this new guy comes and says, look, I'm on this desert island too. Why don't you let me have some of your supplies that you've made? And the guy says, well, fine, you can have all those, but you're gonna have to pay me back with interest in 3 years, right? And I want 10% interest a year. And the guy says, well, actually, all of your supplies right now are rotting. And if I just give you them back in 2 or 3 years, I'm actually doing you a favor, right? Like, why should I have to pay interest on this stuff when I'm actually going to be the one that makes sure that you get back as good, leather and, wheat, because, you've got moths eating them right now and whatnot. So I think people just think in their mind that, money is a bit like going back to gold. Like, this is something that's always going to be valuable no matter what. And so as soon as you have monetary, people get the idea that, I can get Kenyan shillings for this. It is sort of like the ultimate savings in the world. Like, there's nothing better than that in a way. And all of our, like ideas around like God and all this kind of stuff have been sort of merged into this, economic system. So people just think money is the best thing that there is, So it is psychologically is huge.
Mm.
The two places where governments have actually underwritten time credits have had a massive impact in Japan and Austria, isn't it? Austria, where the government actually underwrites them, gives that people confidence. These are time banks with older people, so that they know that those credits are going to have a value later on. It made a massive difference, massive difference. I'm not persuaded anybody in government here to think about that. And people interact with the ledger themselves, or that's who actually interacts with that ledger?
Yeah, so that's usually what they'll call a wallet these days. So even like the technology of the ledger is totally separated from the technology of the wallet. Essentially, when you're interacting with the internet, right? When you send your browser is facilitate. Your browser is the wallet to the internet, if you will, right? You're typing stuff in there, and then there's some interaction with other websites and things like that. So there's a lot of these wallets out there that are also a gimmick and trying to get money off of you by using the wallet. Not all of them, but there's some that are very skimmed down and literally just do that. So in our case, we actually don't even have a web interface at all. We have a server sitting on the telecom in Kenya, right? So you dial a little short code, because our users don't even have internet. So they get a little USSD menu, which basically says, like, they dial *483 *46 hash, and then they get this menu. And then it says, your balance. It says 1 to send, and you would have to put the phone number of that other person, and then you put the amount, and then you put a password, and you hit send. We take that information, right? We collect it all together with their PIN number, their phone number. We unlock their private key on the blockchain. We do the transaction. The blockchain makes sure they clear. That's just our database, right? And then we send the transaction result back to both users, which basically just says, you moved this amount of tokens to this person, so they get their receipts. And it's so from the point of view of the users on our side, it's just a database. It doesn't really mean that much, Yeah.
I've seen cryptocurrencies that are sort of feeding off, certainly in Southeast Asia now, where they're getting people to gamble, and they're using the cryptocurrency to actually gamble with each other, and that's frightening. I mean, it's because I'm always interested in how you get trust in these sort of systems when there's so many bad examples, as well as it's got to be from the personal relationships you forge directly with people, hasn't it? I mean, it's difficult.
I think there's a lot of intentionality. When I hear Edgar talk, and even when I like around Kenya, we're in lots of different kind of villages and areas, and there's some groups in Nairobi where it was like started by a bunch of youth that are like waste pickers, and their entire intentionality was, there was nothing about community involvement in their case, for instance, right? And it's just de facto, like, of course, no one would trust them to take that, because they weren't even accepting it back for their trash. You know what I mean? Like, if there isn't some intent, we've also seen this happen with Red Cross, where like, if there isn't sort of some social magic and social intention and cooperative, feeling, then often even with Red Cross, they can be handing out something and people just see it as a handout. In other words, you know, like, what is this thing you just gave me as Red Cross? Thank you for the donation, kind of thing. And then, you know, there's nothing after that. So I think the community side and intentionality is just, it's so huge.
Just want to comment on that, because what I want to intend to use in our communities is for the community itself to create their own local community currency. It's not a global one, it's theirs, but I want it to be distributed through basic income. So you're saying that if it was given as a handout, they don't value it, or what do you mean by that? When the
it depends on the community, depends on what the, you know, the intentionality was, you know, and also it depends on who's owning it as well, in a way, right? Like if you know, the 6 of us are coming together and say, okay, let's create a UBI such that every Monday we all get 20 units of this, right? And then maybe maybe we would also say that there's a holding tax as well of 4 credits a month or something like this, right? Or something like this, or 2% or something like this. And we say, okay, great. And at the same time, what is the goods and services that are actually on offer behind this thing? And I think if that's not clear, then you are just, you know, you're in danger of that sort of thing. You know, you're in danger of people just saying, okay, great, you just made like a little token minting machine and there it is laying in the corner, but who's really behind it? What's the backer of last resort? All that kind of stuff, you know? And if that's not clear, then it's very hard. So with our villages and, you know, community groups, we actually get them to write out like contracts, you know, like, we are offering this many chapati, like, I'm one of the individuals in that group, like, Edgar's going to offer this much. I don't know. What would you sell, Edgar? Teaching.
Well, actually, gardening.
Gardening.
I
Yeah.
give it an hour of planting bulbs.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, over this time period, and that's going to depend on the community, how many hours is Edgar good for? And in our case, you know, we're not doing the sort of like debit and credit kind of systems with a mutual credit. So it's like, you know, Edgar's actually just minting his vouchers, right? And they're backed by his commitment. And there's sort of a social, you know, committee with the chief and the elders that are there to say that if Edgar spends these vouchers, he ought to accept them back. So that sort of trade balance is a very key, important thing. And that's, you know, if that's not there, it's a little bit like, you know, the example we often give is like, there was a supermarket here called Tuskie's that just went out of business, and they used to have vouchers. And if Tuskie's didn't accept their vouchers back, it would be a really big deal, right? And no one would even, you know, like that would be a huge, big, it would be media worthy, you know what I mean? Like, it would be, you know, like someone could go to court and that sort of thing, or at least there would be some sort of arbitration. And I like the community groups to sort of take it as seriously as that, you know?
Well, Martin's statement of money as a promise to contribute is a very interesting statement, because it's a promise to contribute. Contribute what? Or promise really to accept offers to contribute as themselves validating. And I really like the idea of money as a promise to contribute, but I'm wondering where that takes us. Well, when Martin says what's behind money, money is in effect a promise to contribute. But I think it's also a promise to accept other people's promises to contribute. And so at some point, that notion both is very attractive, but I'm wondering how we build on that in the currency. What we found originally, we started off time banking with groups of neighbors who would help contribute to each other. And we understood that. But that didn't have the energy needed or the funding needed to fund the infrastructure to keep that going. And so that was when I developed the notion of co-production, that every nonprofit that has a mission needs the people whom it's helping to pay it forward in some way so that what they, so, as a way to fulfill their mission. But the whole question of how we then define a currency, the currency is really defined by who will accept it as a promise, or who will accept it as a promise that they in turn can spend to get what they need. So that what they, so, as a way to fulfill their mission. But the whole question of how we then define a currency, the currency is really defined by who will accept it as a promise, or who will accept it as a promise that they in turn can spend to get what they need.
So what's the difference between when you did the community currency with actual paper money that you created versus now it's digital, or is it both right now in Kenya?
It's all digital now. We still have a lot of the paper stuff, but we basically, swapped it out of circulation. There's probably, 10,000 notes floating around Kenya at this point. But
so what was interesting to me about Will sharing about the vouchers was that because you give out your vouchers, you have to accept your vouchers back. It takes care of that business of the promise, because basically when he gives out, people expect that he makes his own promise to himself in a way, because he stands for his own vouchers. And that's just a really interesting way of taking care of the circularity of these things. You're not dependent on other people possibly keeping true to the commitment, or possibly not. And if they don't, you start leaking energy out of your network. But my guess is that by being responsible for your own vouchers, the community can much more rapidly see if you're playing fair or not, or you just don't get things back that you want from the things you've given out. I'd love to hear from you how that works, Will. We may be running out of time, but I just like to, Time Bank in Seattle, I find is really interesting because it is sort of founded in the institutions, the nonprofit institutions. So the Time Bank there has 450 members, and 47 of those members are nonprofits. And the nonprofits do not pay into any time into the Time Bank, but they are actually a source of demand for the Time Bank. And that is actually what keeps it steady. So the members go and do stuff for the nonprofits and earn time credits for doing that stuff for the nonprofits. And the nonprofits just go deeper and deeper and deeper into, in quotes, debt. But it's understood that they will do that this is volunteering. And basically they'll pay back a little bit here and there, but they don't have to pay back the hours. And then the people who earn the hours from the nonprofits start exchanging between themselves. They're sort of wealthy in time credits that they've actually earned helping the nonprofits. And there's this feeling of sort of wealth in the community because they have developed all these credits, earned these credits that they now feel empowered to spend between them because they've earned them helping their community. And and it's a very energetic time bank. And I just find that really interesting, how the basis for that time bank, for the sharing of the wealth, is the fact that they've actually helped institutions in their community that need the help, but they don't expect any payback from those institutions. I think that's such an interesting model, really, for time banking.
Thank you, everybody, for your contributions there. That will end this part. We were discussing the way that money has shaped our world and our attitudes and the way that we see things. And Will has just emphasized how important people see money as the ultimate substance of life, almost. They'll do anything to get it.
No, I don't want to waste what's left. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on